study how different parts of the brain are connected together and how that's important for how we feel and make choices. But I got interested in the brain starting around middle and high school. I was just really interested in how we know how our thoughts and feelings worked in the brain and how the brain made those happen. And in high school, I got really interested when I started learning about some special building blocks found in the body called cells, and special cells in the brain that connect to each other and talk to each other. And so today, one of my goals as a neuroscientist is to figure out how all these different cells talk to each other in one part of the brain, and also how they talk to each other across all these different parts of the brain, and then how these connections allow us to have different types of emotions as well as to make decisions. And today I'm going to be answering some questions that I got from some awesome students like you, as well as telling you all a bit about how I ended up studying what I do today. Martine and Nichole, who are 4th graders from Holy Rosary, asked why and how did I choose to be a neuroscientist. So that's a little complicated, but I was interested, like I said, from middle to high school in like psychology and how the brain worked. But originally I thought I was going to go try and be a psychologist or psychiatrist. And in college, I had decided to be an engineer for a while, and one called a biomedical engineer. So I got to study chemistry, biology, more just how like living things worked, and from an engineering perspective, so like a problem-solving sort of practical thing, building things. And I had learned about these really cool technologies that people used when they were studying how brains and how the cells talk to each other in the brain, using things such as light to activate a cell, or chemicals and viruses that would make it so that you could turn cells on and off. And I just thought, that's super cool. I would really love to be able to use those kinds of techniques to learn how we can have different emotions or how we have different actions. And so I decided, why not? I will go try to study the brain in more research. So this first question is from a 4th grade class at Evergreen Elementary, and they're asking, how does the brain really work? How does information get into the brain? And so the brain's just really cool because it allows us to interact with the world around us. And this is done by taking in all the things that we either are touching, or something we smell, or taste, see, hear, even to be able to figure out where our limbs are in space. These are all different senses that we have. And we're able to sense this and all this information through these tiny things on our body called receptors. And so this receptor is able to get some sort of signal from the outside world. And then this receptor is connected to, you can think of these long strings called nerves, which then are connected back up to our brain. So it's taking the signal that was started from having some sort of thing connect to the receptor, activating the receptor, then it goes up these long strings called the nerves to the brain. And then from there, the brain will process this information, and it's able then to connect back to the nerves and send signals to the body to say, hey, do something. So within the brain, when that information is getting from the brain, there are these cells inside it that are called neurons. And neurons have several different parts. The part that's going to first be taking that information it gets is this long branching part called dendrites. Dendrites also have receptors to be able to get these different signals in. And this will either turn the cells on or off more. And eventually, if the signal is really strong, it'll go from these dendrites down to the main part of the neuron, which has all these different parts inside it that help the neuron stay active and healthy. And with the strongest enough signal, the cell will then say, oh, I need to fire. I need to send the signal as well. And so it goes out the other side of the cell from where that cell body is, through, you can think of it as a long tube, which is called the axon. And from the axon, the signal will then be released from the ends of the axon, or the terminals of the axon. and this will be released in the form of chemicals. And so the chemicals will then move across this really tiny space that's between the cell and another cell that will then have receptors on its own dendrites, continuing the signal on and on. And so neurons have two different forms of communication that they're using. So when it's first going through the cell itself, and we're trying to figure out if that signal's strong enough for it to release the chemicals then to send a signal to another cell. Within the cell, that signal is in the form of electricity. And then, like I said, when it has to release the signal out to another cell, it's using chemicals to be able to send the signal across the gaps between the two. So they have electrochemical signaling. And so this is how these neurons can talk to each other, how the brain is then able to talk within it and then be able to send information back to the nerves and to the parts of the body to have actions happen. Students from Evergreen Elementary also asked, what other connections do you have in your brain? So I've been talking about neurons a lot and how they talk to one another, but there's so many different types of not only neurons in the brain, but other types of cells that help these neurons out and keep your brain healthy as well. And so some of these helper cells are called glial cells. And like neurons, there are several different types of glia. Some, like microglia, keep the brain safe by acting kind of like security. So they'll change shape when they see something that shouldn't be in the brain and need to defend the brain. So it kind of starts attacking the thing that shouldn't be there. And then they also act kind of like cleanup as well, and they'll clean up dead cells by eating them. And this helps to keep the brain healthy. So there's a lot of interest in what all these different cells are doing in the brain and how they talk to one another. Students also asked me, why are brains pink? And brains are pink because they're getting blood. And the blood moving around the brain helps it so that you get that pink color that you see. And that's from the blood that's coming in, bringing in oxygen. And so when you see the brain outside of the body, it probably looks more grayish or whitish to you. And that's because we have to use certain chemicals to fix the brain, because the brain is really squishy, and to be able to keep it intact when it's outside of the body, and to be able to then also have us study them and look at them, we have to again fix them with these chemicals. And those make it so that we're pushing the blood during this fixation process out of the brain. And with all the blood leaving, it then makes it that grayish-whitish color. Following up on why brains are pink, so how does this blood get to the brain? And that's because the heart is super powerful and has all these different connections that go throughout the body to give the body blood. And this includes the brain as well. So the heart is pumping blood up to the brain through these giant tubes, or these tubes called arteries. And the arteries are carrying blood that has all these different nutrients, oxygen, glucose, things that the brain needs to be fed to stay alive and healthy. And so from the arteries, one of the major arteries where blood is coming from going to the brain is the common carotid artery. And then this carotid artery, when it gets to the brain, ends up branching out into many different smaller arteries that will go to different regions. And so it's kind of like the branches of a tree. And this allows blood to pretty much get everywhere throughout the brain. Evergreen Elementary also asked, why is the brain all gooey and slimy? And that's for a couple of different reasons. So one of them is that the brain isn't just the skull and the brain. There's actually a couple of different layers between that. And this helps to protect and form a cushion around the brain. So this first layer that's closest to the skull is the dura layer, or dura mater. Between the dura mater, or after the dura mater, is the arachnoid layer, arachnoid mater. And then finally, the third final layer that's closest to the brain is the pia mater. And so, not only are these layers kind of helping to have a buffer between the skull and the brain, but there's this fluid that's moving between the arachnoid layer and the pia mater in this area called the subarachnoid space. And this fluid is called cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid not only helps to form that cushion that helps prevent the brain from jostling all around when we're moving about, but it's also important for supplying food to the brain, and it helps keep the brain nourished and healthy. And it's by helping to circulate things called nutrients throughout the brain. And not only is that CSF that's kind of moving through, helping to give that shiny sort of color that you might think of in those layers as well, but it's also just because of what the brain's made of. So the brain is a very fatty tissue. So it's a composition of, or made up of, a bunch of fat as well as water as well. And again, our body is also made up a lot of water. So the brain is as well. And so the fat in particular is making the brain have that kind of jelly, squishy sort of texture. This question is from Owen, a 6th grader at Montessori Center School. And it's what part of the brain is responsible for creating anxiety? And that's a really great question. There's actually not one part of the brain that will cause anxiety. It's because of all these different changes that are happening in the brain when you see something stressful or making you something that scares you. And those sorts of connections in these regions and cells talking to one another will then produce anxiety. And so it's, again, not only just how the cells are talking to each other, but it's then other changes in chemicals in the body, such as things called proteins or hormones, that can change how the brain is active. So it's related, again, a lot to how we react to fear and stress. And I can say that some of the regions that are important in that anxiety that you might feel are a region called the amygdala, which is, again, important for understanding fear and for anxiety and a lot of different emotional responses and being able to process our emotions. And the amygdala talks to several different regions, including a bunch of regions in frontal cortex, as well as to a region called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is important for regulating stress, and that's through the release of molecules called hormones. And so it's the combination of how just a couple of these different regions talk, but many more as well, and how they result in changes to how these strong these connections are between the regions, as well as how active they are, and the release of these different hormones that can cause anxiety. But this is something that we're really still trying to fully figure out, and how that can become very disruptive to people as well. Students also asked, what did I think I would find when I studied the brain? And that's a great question, and something I'm still figuring out as well, because I keep learning as I keep studying more and more about how the brain works. But one of the things I was really excited to learn more about was, again, how people can feel different things or react to different things differently. And I wanted to be able to understand that better, so that for people that feel really sad or really anxious, nervous, stressed, or maybe just really scared about different things, being able to better explain why their brain might work that way, to be able to help them better understand themselves. And so that's kind of what I hope ultimately I get to be able to do as a neuroscientist, and it's something that I'm still learning along the way. And finally, G2, a 2nd grader from Spiritridge Elementary, asked, which subject should I be best at to become a neuroscientist? Well, G2, I would say it's whatever is really interesting and exciting to you, because neuroscientists use a lot of different skills, and they come from many different backgrounds. So there's no one thing you need to be best at. If anything, it's great being a neuroscientist, because it gives you an opportunity to work with tons of different people who have better strengths or different weaknesses in things that maybe you're better at or worse at than them. And so it allows you to really get to work together. And I think that's an awesome thing about being a neuroscientist. I will say that some of the things that I use as a neuroscientist are math, science, but even my reading skills, my writing skills, everything honestly comes into play for what I do day to day. I want to thank everyone who's sent in questions from all the different schools, as well as the particular students that did. So thank you so much. It was a lot of fun to answer them and to brush up on some background knowledge as well. And I just want to say, if you're really interested in the brain, you have every opportunity to become a neuroscientist. So just stay curious, stay excited, and keep asking questions.